She gave him the best 10 years of her life. He gave her a key and a lie. The candle on her birthday cake was still burning when her husband walked through the door and blew out her entire world. He didn't say happy birthday. He didn't even look at the cake with her name on it. He just stood there and told her he was leaving, for another woman. She sat alone in the dark that night, not crying, not screaming, just holding a key she found hidden in his closet. She thought it opened some secret to his affair. She was wrong. It opened something much darker. That key led her to a storage unit he'd kept secret for 5 years. This is her story. Clara sat alone in the dark living room, the only light coming from the single candle that flickered on the birthday cake in front of her. The flame danced, casting long, distorted shadows on the walls of the home she had built with so much love. She was 34 years old today, and the silence in the house was so heavy it felt like a physical weight on her chest. She could still hear the echo of his words, spoken just a few hours ago, words that had ripped her world apart. She looked at the cake, a beautiful red velvet creation she had ordered from the bakery in town. It was his favorite, not hers. Everything she did was for him. On the frosting, in elegant script, it said, "Happy birthday, Clara." It felt like a cruel joke now, a monument to a celebration that never happened. She remembered the morning perfectly. It had started with such promise. The sun streamed through the kitchen windows as she made her coffee, humming a little tune. Mark had come downstairs, looking handsome in his weekend clothes. He gave her a quick, distracted kiss on the cheek and said, "Big day today, huh?" She had smiled, her heart full. She thought he meant her birthday, the surprise she suspected he had planned. She had seen him hiding a small, velvet box a week ago, and her mind had raced with possibilities. They had been married for 10 years. Maybe it was a necklace or perhaps a lovely pair of earrings. The anticipation was a sweet ache in her chest. She had spent the day preparing. She cleaned the house from top to bottom, made sure the garden looked perfect, and set the dining table with their best china. She put on the dress he always said he loved, a deep blue silk number that brought out the color of her eyes. She did her hair and makeup with extra care. She wanted to look beautiful for him when he gave her his gift, when he looked at her with that spark of love she had been missing lately. But as the afternoon wore on, a tiny seed of unease began to grow. He was on his phone more than usual, stepping out into the yard to take calls. When he came back in, his smile didn't reach his eyes. She asked him if everything was all right, and he just said it was work, nothing for her to worry about. She accepted it, as she always did. She didn't want to push, not today. She wanted everything to be perfect. By 6 o'clock, the cake had arrived, and she placed it proudly in the center of the table. The house smelled of the pot roast she had slow-cooked all day, his favorite meal. She lit the candles around the living room and waited. 7 o'clock came and went. She told herself he was just running late, 8 o'clock. She started to worry, texting him a gentle, "Everything okay?" He replied with a curt, "On my way." Her heart lifted a little. The sound of his key in the lock at 8:30 was like a starter pistol for her hope. She rushed to the hallway, a huge smile on her face, ready to greet him. But the moment she saw his face, the smile froze and then shattered. He looked gray, tired, and there was something else in his eyes, something she had never seen before. Resolve. He didn't say happy birthday. He didn't kiss her. He just walked past her into the living room, saw the beautifully set table, the flickering candles, the cake, and for a second, something that looked like pain flickered across his features. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by that cold, hard resolve. Clara stood in the doorway, her arms wrapped around herself. "Mark," she began, "what's wrong?" He took a deep breath and turned to face her. "Clara, we need to talk." Those 5 words, the most dreaded words in any relationship. Her stomach plummeted to the floor. "Okay," she whispered, her voice already trembling. He didn't ask her to sit. He just started talking. "I can't do this anymore, Clara. I'm leaving you." The words didn't make sense at first. They were just sounds. "Leaving? Leaving for where? For how long?" Her brain scrambled to find a logical explanation. "Is it a work trip?" she asked, her voice small. "Tonight." "On my birthday?" He shook his head, and the pity in his eyes was almost worse than the words. "No, Clara, I'm leaving you. I'm moving out. I've been unhappy for a long time. Years, unhappy." The word was a foreign language. They had a good life. A beautiful home. They were comfortable. They were Clara and Mark, the couple everyone envied. How could he be unhappy? But before she could voice any of this, he delivered the final blow. "I've met someone else," he said, the words flat and unfeeling. "Her name is Jessica. I'm in love with her. I'm sorry." The air left Clara's lungs. It was as if he had punched her in the gut. She gripped the doorframe for support. Jessica. She didn't know a Jessica. The name echoed in her head, a stranger who had stolen her husband. You're leaving me? For another woman? On my birthday?" She choked out, tears finally springing to her eyes, hot and furious. He had the decency to look down at his shoes. "It wasn't planned like this," he muttered. I couldn't keep living a lie. You deserve to know." "Deserve to know?" She laughed, a hollow, broken sound that echoed in the silent room. "I deserve to know? I deserve to have my heart shattered on my 34th birthday, with a cake that has my name on it, with your favorite dinner getting cold in the kitchen." He just stood there, taking it, his jaw tight. He had prepared for this. He had his speech all ready. She was just the collateral damage. "I'll come back for my things tomorrow when you're at work," he said. "I've already moved most of my stuff out over the last few weeks." The last few weeks. The realization hit her like a wave of ice water. The late nights at work, the secretive phone calls, the distance. It hadn't been her imagination. It had been him, methodically dismantling their marriage while she planned his favorite meals and dreamed of jewelry. "Get out," she whispered, her voice shaking with a mixture of rage and grief. "Get out of my house. Get out of my sight." He nodded as if he had expected this. He turned and walked back down the hall, past the family photos on the wall, past the coat she had hung for him, and out the front door. He didn't look back. The sound of his car starting and driving away was the loneliest sound she had ever heard. And now, here she was, sitting in the dark, the candle on her cake burning low. The tears had stopped. There were none left. There was only a cold, hard knot of something else settling in the pit of her stomach. It felt like a stone, heavy and sharp. It wasn't just sadness. It was the beginning of something else, something she had never felt before. A deep, primal need for things to be made right. Not for him to come back, she realized with sudden, startling clarity. She didn't want him back. She wanted him to understand. She wanted him to feel a fraction of the devastation he had so casually dumped in her lap. The story she was about to tell herself, the one that would unfold over the next few months, was not a story of a woman who crumbled. It was the story of a woman who was broken, yes, but who then took every single sharp piece of that broken heart and forged them into a blade. It was the story of how Clara, the quiet, devoted wife who always put everyone else first, learned to fight. And she was going to win. Clara didn't sleep that night. She sat on the floor of her living room as the candle sputtered and died, plunging the room into complete darkness. She watched the shadows of the trees outside dance on the ceiling as the moon moved across the sky. By the time the first gray light of dawn crept through the curtains, a plan was already beginning to form. It was vague, more of a feeling than a concrete list of steps. But its core was solid. She would not be a victim. She would be a student. She would learn everything about the man she had married, the man she clearly never truly knew. The first step was the hardest. She had to pretend to be okay. She went to work the next day, her eyes puffy and red despite the layers of concealer. Her colleague, Sarah, a woman in her 50s with a kind heart and sharp eyes, took one look at her and pulled her into a supply closet. "What happened?" she asked. Clara just shook her head, the tears threatening to come again. "He left me," she whispered, "on my birthday, for another woman." Sarah's face went through a series of emotions. Shock, sympathy, and then a flash of pure, unadulterated anger. "That son of a bitch," she hissed, pulling Clara into a tight hug. "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. What are you going to do?" Clara pulled back, wiping her eyes. She thought of the plan, the cold, hard stone in her stomach. "I'm going to get through today," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "And then I'm going to figure it out." Sarah nodded, a glint of respect in her eye. "You let me know if you need anything at all. I've got a brother who's a lawyer, you know, a real shark." Clara filed that information away. A shark. She might need a shark. Over the next week, Clara existed in a fog of grief and grim determination. Mark did come for his things, slipping in while she was at work. He had left his keys on the counter, a final, insulting gesture. He took his clothes, his books, the ridiculously expensive sound system he loved, and the large flat-screen TV from the living room. He left the furniture, he left the photos, and he left a void so large she felt she could fall into it and never be found. but he also left something else. In his haste, he had left his old laptop in the back of the hall closet. It was an ancient thing, a dinosaur he had replaced years ago. Clara found it when she was cleaning, trying to scrub the memory of him from the house. She stared at it for a long time. It was a relic of their early marriage. It held their honeymoon photos, the first drafts of his business plans, all the mundane detritus of a shared life. A part of her wanted to smash it, but a larger, more curious part of her wanted to see what else it held. She plugged it in, holding her breath as the old machine whirred to life. It still worked. The desktop was a mess of old files. She ignored the family photos for now, her heart not ready for that. She went straight to his old email account. She knew his passwords. She had set up half his accounts for him when they first got married. He used the same one for everything back then, their anniversary date. She typed it in. It worked. His old email account opened, flooded with years of old spam and newsletters. But as she scrolled, searching for anything from the past few weeks, she realized this wasn't where he would have communicated with a new lover. This account was all but abandoned. She was about to close it in frustration when a folder in the sidebar caught her eye. It was labeled simply Work Archive. Curiosity piqued, she clicked on it. It was a graveyard of old work emails, chains from projects long finished. But nestled in among them were a series of emails from an address she didn't recognize. The name attached was just initials. JD, the first one, was from about 6 months ago. The subject line was Project Phoenix. Her heart began to pound. She opened it. The email was brief, a simple question about a report. It was completely innocent, but it was the reply that made her blood run cold. Mark had replied, copying his personal email address. It was a forwarding address. He was having his work emails forwarded to a secret personal account. Clara's mind raced. Why would he need to do that? Unless he was hiding something from her. She spent the next few hours doing something she never thought herself capable of. She became a digital detective. She found breadcrumbs. A receipt for a fancy hotel downtown from 2 months ago, paid for with a credit card she didn't recognize. A reservation for 2 at a romantic restaurant on a night he had told her he was working late. A new, password-protected cloud storage account that she couldn't access. The clues painted a picture of a double life that had been going on for far longer than he had admitted. The betrayal wasn't just on her birthday. It was a slow, creeping poison that had been infecting their marriage for at least 6 months. Maybe longer. This new knowledge didn't make her feel worse. Strangely, it made her feel better. It hardened the stone in her stomach into something stronger, something like steel. The sadness was still there, a deep, throbbing ache, but now it was tempered with a cold, clarifying rage. He hadn't just left her. He had lied to her, deceived her, and made a fool of her for months. He had robbed her of the chance to fight for her marriage, to see the problems, to try and fix them. He had just checked out and started a new life while she was still living in the old one, cooking his pot roast and planning his birthday surprises. Her plan was no longer a vague feeling. It was a mission. She would find out everything. She would build a case. She wasn't sure what she would do with it yet, but the power was in the knowledge. And knowledge, she was learning, was a weapon. The next step was to meet the other woman. Not for a confrontation, not yet, just to see. To put a face to the name that had destroyed her world. It was surprisingly easy. Jessica's life was an open book online. She was a yoga instructor, 5 years younger than Clara, with long blonde hair and a perpetually serene smile. Her social media was a curated paradise of beach sunsets, acai bowls, and inspirational quotes about finding your joy. Clara sat in her car across the street from the yoga studio where Jessica worked. She watched the women in their expensive leggings file out after a class. And then she saw her. Jessica was laughing with a friend, her hair in a perfect messy bun, her skin glowing. She looked happy. She looked carefree. And Clara felt a surge of hatred so powerful it nearly choked her. This woman, this stranger, had been sleeping with her husband. She had been the recipient of the sweet texts that used to be for Clara. She had been the one he whispered, "I love you" to at night. Clara watched her get into a shiny new SUV and drive away. She noted the license plate. It was a small piece of information, but it was hers. Another piece of the puzzle. That night, she called Sarah's brother, the shark. His name was David, and he was exactly as Sarah had described. Sharp, direct, and completely without sentimentality. She told him the whole story, leaving nothing out. She told him about the emails, the hotel receipts, the secret account. David listened without interrupting. When she was finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Okay, Clara," he said. "This is good. This is very good. You've got evidence of financial infidelity, which is always useful. But here's the thing, we live in a no-fault state. It doesn't matter, legally, that he cheated on you. The divorce will proceed on the grounds of irreconcilable differences. The adultery won't affect the division of assets or alimony unless it had a direct impact on the marital finances." Clara's heart sank. "So he gets away with it?" she asked, her voice tight. "He gets to just walk away, start his new life with her, and take half of everything we built together?" David's voice was calm, but there was a hint of a smile in it. "Legally, yes, that's generally what happens." He paused. "But you said he left on your birthday. He moved his stuff out while you were at work. He's been lying to you for months. He's been spending marital funds on this other woman." "Yes," she whispered. "Well," David continued, "the law might not care about his bad behavior, but the court of public opinion does. And sometimes, the threat of that court can be a very powerful motivator in a settlement. People don't like to be seen as the bad guy. They don't want their friends, their family, their colleagues to know the ugly truth. They want to come out of a divorce smelling like a rose, the victim of an unhappy marriage." A slow, dawning understanding began to creep over Clara. "Are you suggesting?" "I'm not suggesting anything," he said smoothly. "I'm just saying that you have information. You have a story. It's a powerful one. And before we go to court, before we start the official proceedings, you have the opportunity to decide how you want to use that information. You could confront him. You could lay out everything you know. You could let him see that the quiet little wife he left behind is a lot more observant than he gave her credit for. And then, you could tell him what you're planning to do with that information." Clara was silent, processing his words. She wasn't suggesting blackmail, not in the illegal sense. She was suggesting leverage. She was suggesting that she could make Mark understand that his reputation, his shiny new relationship, his carefully constructed narrative of an unhappy marriage could be shattered with a few well-placed emails and a story told to the right people. "And what do I want in return?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. David's reply was immediate. "That's entirely up to you. What do you want, Clara?" What did she want? She thought about it. She didn't just want money, though she knew she would need it to rebuild her life. She didn't want the house, which now felt like a prison. She wanted something more. She wanted him to understand. She wanted him to feel the weight of his choices. She wanted him to look at her with the same fear and confusion she had felt when he had shattered her world on her birthday. "I want him to know that I know," she said finally. "I want him to see me, the real me, not the doormat he left behind, and I want him to be afraid of what I might do." David chuckled, a low, appreciative sound. "That's a good start, Clara. That's a very good start. Let's talk strategy." The strategy David laid out was simple, elegant, and terrifying. Clara would invite Mark to the house. She would tell him it was to discuss the division of assets, to be civilized, to avoid lawyers. She would have everything prepared. The emails printed out, the hotel receipt, the license plate number, a list of dates and times. She would lay it all out in front of him, calmly and quietly, and then she would wait. It took Clara a week to work up the courage to make the call. Her hand shook as she dialed his number. He answered on the second ring, his voice wary. "Clara?" "Hi, Mark," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I was wondering if you could come by the house tomorrow evening, around 7. There are some things we need to discuss about the house, the finances. I'd like to try and do this amicably, without lawyers getting involved and taking all our money." There was a long pause on the other end. She could almost hear him thinking, weighing his options. He probably expected a tearful, emotional wreck. This calm, practical request didn't fit the narrative he had constructed of her. Finally, he spoke. "Yeah, okay, 7 tomorrow, I'll be there." The next day was the longest of Clara's life. She spent it preparing. She put on a simple but elegant black dress, not for him but for herself. She needed to feel strong. She arranged the documents on the coffee table in a neat, organized pile. She made sure the lighting was bright, not romantic. She wanted no shadows, nowhere to hide. At exactly 7 o'clock, the doorbell rang. The sound echoed through the empty house. She walked to the door, took a deep breath, and opened it. Mark stood on the doorstep, looking uncomfortable. He was dressed in casual clothes, a stark contrast to her formal wear. He looked different to her now. Smaller, less significant. The man who had once been the center of her universe now seemed like a stranger wearing her husband's face. "Clara," he said, a weak attempt at a smile on his face. "Mark," she replied, stepping aside. "Come in." He walked into the living room and his eyes immediately went to the pile of papers on the coffee table. He looked at them, then back at her, a flicker of unease in his eyes. "What's all this?" "Please, sit down," she said, her voice calm. She gestured to the armchair, while she sat on the sofa opposite him, putting the coffee table between them like a no-man's land. He sat, perching on the edge of the chair. "Clara, I know this is hard," he began, launching into what was clearly a prepared speech. "I know I handled things badly. I'm sorry for the way I told you. It was cowardly. But I want us to be able to move forward from this in a mature way. We can split things 50-50, sell the house, and get on with our lives." Clara let him talk. She watched his lips move, but the words were just noise. She was waiting. When he finally finished, she leaned forward slightly and picked up the top sheet of paper from the pile. "Project Phoenix," she read aloud, her voice flat. "Do you remember that, Mark?" The color drained from his face. He stared at the paper in her hand as if it were a venomous snake. "What? Where did you get that?" "You left your old laptop," she said simply. "In the hall closet. You really should be more careful." She picked up another paper. "The receipt from the Grand Hotel? Very nice. I see you ordered the champagne." And here, she held up another, a screenshot of Jessica's social media page. "She's very pretty. I watched her leave her yoga studio the other day. She drives a new SUV. Did you help her with that?" Mark's face was a mask of horror. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He just stared at her, his eyes wide with shock and a growing fear. He had underestimated her. He had completely and utterly underestimated her. Clara continued, her voice still calm, almost pleasant. "I know everything, Mark. I know about the 6 months of lies. I know about the secret email account. I know about the hotel stays and the dinners. I know about Jessica. I know it all." She put the papers down and folded her hands in her lap. "You told me you couldn't keep living a lie. You were right, and now I can't either. So I'm going to tell you what's going to happen." He just stared, utterly defeated. The confident man who had walked out on her birthday was gone, replaced by a trembling, guilty shell. "Our marriage is over, that's a fact. And legally, in this state, you're right, we could split everything 50-50. You could walk away with half of everything we built, buy a nice little love nest with Jessica, and pretend I never existed. That's one option." She let the silence hang in the air for a moment. "But there's another option. An option where I take all of this information," she gestured to the pile of papers, "and I make sure that everyone knows exactly what kind of man you are. I send it to your boss, to your mother, to all our friends, to Jessica's friends. I make sure that the story of how you left your wife on her birthday for another woman is known to everyone in your life. I make sure your reputation is in tatters." Mark's face went from pale to ashen. "You wouldn't," he whispered. "You're not that kind of person." "You're right," Clara said, a small, cold smile playing on her lips. The old Clara wasn't. "But you killed her, Mark. You killed her on her birthday. So now you have to deal with the woman who's left. And this woman will do whatever it takes." She stood up. "So here's my offer. You will give me the house. Free and clear. You will sign it over to me. You will take no equity from it. You will walk away with your car, your clothes, and your new girlfriend. And in return, I will keep my mouth shut. I will let you have your new life. I won't say a word to anyone. We will get a quiet, uncontested divorce on my terms. That's the deal. Take it or leave it." Mark stared at her, his mind racing. The house was their biggest asset. It was worth a fortune. Walking away from it meant starting over with nothing. But the alternative was unthinkable. He saw the look in her eyes, the cold, hard steel, and he knew she meant every word. This wasn't a bluff. This was an execution. "You can't do this," he said, his voice weak. "It's not fair." "Fair?" Clara laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "Fair? You want to talk about fair? You stood in this room on my birthday with that cake on the table, and you told me you were leaving me for another woman. You didn't give me a chance to fight, to understand, to even have a happy last memory. You just took a wrecking ball to my life and walked away. Don't you dare talk to me about fair." She walked over to the front door and opened it. You have until tomorrow at noon to have your lawyer call mine, David Silverman. His number is on the top of that pile. If I don't hear from him, I start making phone calls. Good night, Mark. He got up slowly, his legs unsteady. He walked to the door, pausing for a moment to look at her. For a second, she saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Regret, maybe, or just the shock of realizing he had created a monster. Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. Clara leaned against the door, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had done it. She had faced him and won. But instead of triumph, she just felt a deep, profound exhaustion. She slid down the door until she was sitting on the floor, and for the first time since he had left, she cried. Not tears of sadness for him, but tears of relief for herself. She had taken the first, hardest step. She had taken her power back. The next morning at 11:58 a.m., 2 minutes before her deadline, her phone rang. It was David. He sounded almost cheerful. Clara, he said, I just got off the phone with Mark's lawyer. They've accepted your terms. The house is yours. He's signing everything over this afternoon. Congratulations, you did it. Clara thanked him, hung up the phone, and walked to the living room window. She looked out at the street, at the house she now owned outright, at the life she was going to have to rebuild from the ashes. She felt a strange sense of peace. The battle was over. She had won. But as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into a month, Clara realized that winning a battle and winning a war were two different things. She had the house, but it was empty and silent. She had her freedom, but she didn't know what to do with it. The anger that had fueled her, the cold fury that had given her the strength to fight, began to fade, leaving behind a hollow ache. She had got her revenge, but she was still alone. Mark, she heard through the grapevine, had moved in with Jessica. They were playing house, living their perfect life, while she rattled around in this big, empty house, haunted by memories. The victory began to feel hollow. Had she really won? He was with the woman he loved, and she was here, alone. The settlement money from the other assets, the savings they had split, gave her financial security, but it didn't fill the void in her heart. She started to wonder if revenge was really as sweet as they said. It felt more like ash in her mouth. She threw herself into her work, taking on extra projects and staying late at the office. It helped to fill the hours, but at night, when she came home to the silent house, the loneliness was crushing. She would walk from room to room, turning on all the lights, trying to chase away the shadows. But the shadows weren't in the house. They were in her heart. One Saturday, about 2 months after her confrontation with Mark, she decided it was time to tackle the attic. It was a job she had been dreading, a box full of memories she wasn't ready to face. But she was forcing herself. It was time to move on, to clear out the past and make room for a future she couldn't yet imagine. She put on old clothes, tied her hair back, and climbed the pull-down stairs into the dusty, cramped space. The attic was a treasure trove of their shared history. Old Christmas decorations, suitcases from trips they had taken, boxes of books they had both read. She worked methodically, sorting things into piles: keep, donate, trash. It was slow, dusty work, and her mind wandered as she sifted through the artifacts of her marriage. She opened a box labeled wedding. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was her wedding veil. She held it in her hands, the delicate fabric soft against her skin. She remembered walking down the aisle towards Mark, her heart so full of love and hope it felt like it might burst. She remembered the way he had looked at her, the tears in his eyes as he said his vows. Had any of it been real? She didn't know anymore. The memory was tainted now, colored by the knowledge of how it would end. She was about to put the veil back in the box when she noticed a smaller box at the bottom, wedged in the corner. She pulled it out. It was a jewelry box, the one she had seen him hiding a week before her birthday. The one she had thought held a necklace or earrings. Her heart gave a lurch. She had completely forgotten about it in the chaos of the last few months. With trembling hands, she opened the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, was a key. An old-fashioned brass key attached to a small leather tag. Engraved on the tag in elegant script were the words for Clara with all my love, the key to our future. She stared at it, utterly confused. It wasn't jewelry. It was a key. A key to what? She turned it over in her hands, searching for a clue. There was nothing else, just the key and the tag. Her mind raced. A key to our future. What did it mean? Had he bought her something? A safety deposit box? A new car? A vacation home? But why hide it? And why didn't he give it to her? The questions swirled in her head, a confusing mix of old hurt and new, burning curiosity. The key sat on her nightstand for a week. She would pick it up, turn it over in her hands, and try to imagine what it could possibly open. She thought about calling him, but the thought made her stomach turn. She didn't want to give him the satisfaction of hearing the confusion in her voice. She was done being the one who needed answers from him. Finally, she decided to take a different approach. Instead of wondering what the key was for, she would find what it opened. She started small. She tried it on every lock in the house. The front door, the back door, the windows, the old trunk in the attic, the lockbox in the closet where they kept important documents. Nothing. It didn't fit any of them. She thought about a safety deposit box. She went to their bank, the one where they had their joint account, and asked if they had a box in both their names. The bank manager, an older man who knew them well, checked his records and said no. He looked at the key and shook his head. "That's not one of our keys, Mrs. Davis," he said. "Ours are a different shape." Her next thought was a storage unit. She spent an afternoon driving to every storage facility in a 20-mile radius, trying the key in the office doors, asking if they had a unit rented in Mark's name. Most just looked at her like she was crazy. A few checked their records, but there was nothing. She was about to give up, to chalk it up to another one of life's cruel, unsolvable mysteries, when she was going through some old papers in his home office. She wasn't looking for anything in particular, just sorting things to be recycled. In a drawer filled with old manuals for appliances they no longer owned, she found a faded receipt. It was from a place called Harbor View Mini Storage. The address was in a town about an hour away, near the coast. The receipt was dated 5 years ago. It was for a small unit, paid in cash for 6 months. 5 years ago. That was before they were even married. Why would Mark have rented a storage unit back then and paid cash? And why would he keep the receipt? Her detective instincts, dormant for the past few weeks, roared back to life. The next day was a Sunday. Clara got in her car and drove the hour to the coast. The drive was beautiful, winding through small towns and eventually along the shoreline. She barely noticed. Her mind was completely focused on the mystery of the key. Harbor View Mini Storage was a collection of aging, concrete buildings tucked away behind a strip mall. It looked deserted, a relic from a different time. She went to the small office, where a bored-looking teenager was watching something on his phone, earbuds in his ears. She held up the key. "Hi," she said, raising her voice to be heard. "I need to get into my unit. I'm afraid I've forgotten the number. My husband rented it a while ago. The name would be Mark Davis." The teenager sighed, pulled out one earbud, and tapped at a grimy computer keyboard. He squinted at the screen, his lips moving as he read. "Davis, Mark," he mumbled. "Yeah, okay. Unit 47, around the back." He didn't ask for ID. He didn't ask for any proof of who she was. He just pointed. Cash customers were apparently not high on his list of concerns. Clara drove slowly around the back of the buildings, her heart in her throat. The place was even more rundown in the back, with weeds pushing through cracks in the pavement and peeling paint on the metal doors. She found Unit 47, a small, corrugated metal door with a heavy padlock. She got out of the car, the key clutched tightly in her sweaty palm. This had to be it. It had to be. She inserted the key into the lock. It turned with a satisfying click. She took a deep breath and pulled the door up. It rolled open with a loud, groaning sound, the noise echoing off the concrete walls. Sunlight streamed into the small, dark space, illuminating its contents. And Clara gasped. It wasn't filled with old furniture or boxes of junk. It was filled with art. Paintings of all sizes leaned against the walls. Small sculptures sat on a dusty shelf. There were perhaps 20 or 30 pieces in total, and even to Clara's untrained eye, they were beautiful. They were landscapes and portraits, abstract shapes and realistic figures. They were full of color and life and passion. They seemed to pulse with energy, even in this dark, forgotten space. She stepped inside, her eyes wide, drinking it all in. She picked up a small painting of a woman sitting by a window, the light catching her hair in a way that made it seem to glow. It was stunning. She looked at another, a vibrant abstract of the ocean, the blues and greens swirling together in a way that made her feel like she could hear the waves. She had no idea what any of it was worth, but she knew, with a certainty that went to her very core, that it was valuable. Not just in money, but in spirit. This was the work of someone who had poured their soul onto canvas. Why would Mark have hidden all of this, and why wouldn't he have told her about it? As she looked around, she noticed a large, flat package wrapped in brown paper propped up against the back wall. It was different from the others. It was larger, and it was addressed, in careful, elegant handwriting, to Clara. Her breath caught in her throat. She carefully moved a few paintings aside and knelt in front of the package. With trembling hands, she tore away the brown paper. It was a painting, a portrait, of her. She was sitting in their garden, the one she loved so much, a soft smile on her face. The artist had captured not just her likeness, but her spirit. The light in her eyes, the gentle curve of her lips, the way she held her hands in her lap. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. It was her, but more than her. It was the her she had always hoped she was. In the bottom right corner, in small, neat script, was a signature. It wasn't Mark's name. It was a name she didn't recognize, Elias Vance. She stared at the painting for a long time, tears streaming down her face. They weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of confusion, of wonder, of a feeling she couldn't even name. This wasn't about Mark. This was about her. Someone had painted this. Someone had seen her this way, had seen the beauty and grace in her that she often forgot she possessed, and Mark had hidden it. She spent the next hour carefully going through the rest of the unit. There were letters, tied with a ribbon, addressed to Mark in the same elegant handwriting as the signature on her portrait. She didn't open them. Not yet. Her hands were shaking too much. There were more paintings, all of them beautiful, all of them bearing the signature of Elias Vance. There were sketches, too, quick studies of faces and places, each one brimming with life. And then, tucked into the back of a small shelf, behind a stack of sketchbooks, she found a photograph. It was old, faded, and creased, as if it had been carried in a wallet for years. In it, a young woman, beautiful and serious, stood beside a man with kind eyes and paint-stained hands. They were standing in front of an easel, the man's arm around the woman's shoulder. On the back, in handwriting she now recognized, was written, "Mom and Dad, 1985. The man in the photo was Elias Vance. And the woman, Clara realized with a jolt, bore a striking resemblance to Mark. The same shape of the eyes, the same curve of the jaw, her mind was reeling. Mark's father was an artist? Mark had never mentioned it. In all their years together, he had never once spoken of his father. He had said his parents were divorced, that his father was out of the picture, that they didn't have a relationship. He had made it sound like a sad but simple story, the kind of thing that happens in families. But this was a secret. A huge, beautiful, complicated secret that he had carried alone. She gathered a few of the smaller paintings, the ones that called to her the most. She took the letters, tied with their ribbon. She took the photograph. She carefully locked the unit back up, the click of the padlock sounding final and permanent. She drove home in a daze, the paintings in her back seat, her mind churning. The revenge she had sought, the hollow victory she had won, suddenly seemed so small, so petty. Her husband, the man who had betrayed her, was carrying a weight she knew nothing about. A legacy of art and love and loss that he had kept hidden from everyone, including her. That night she sat at her kitchen table, a cup of tea growing cold beside her, and opened the first letter. It was dated over 30 years ago. It was from Elias to his young son, Mark. The paper was thin and yellowed, the ink faded, but the words were still clear, still full of emotion. "My dearest Mark," the letter began, "I'm writing this from a small town in Italy where the light is like nothing I've ever seen. It paints everything in gold. I think of you often, wondering what you're doing if you're happy. I'm sorry I'm not there to see you grow. I'm sorry for a lot of things. But please know, my son, that I love you. I love you more than any painting I could ever create. You are my masterpiece." The letter went on, full of a father's love, of apologies for not being there, of promises of a future together. He wrote about his art, his travels, his dreams. He wrote about the people he met, the places he saw, the colors that inspired him. It was the letter of a man trying to bridge an impossible distance, to stay connected to a son he barely knew. She read through letter after letter, each one a window into the soul of Elias Vance. He was a man of deep feeling, of immense talent, and of profound regret. He wrote about his struggles with alcohol, his battles with depression, his fear that he was not worthy of his son's love. But through it all, his love for Mark shone through, unwavering and pure. In one letter, he wrote about the painting he was working on, a portrait of a beautiful woman he had seen in a garden. He said it was the best thing he had ever done, that something about her had captured his imagination in a way nothing ever had. He said he was saving it for someone special. Clara's hand flew to her mouth. The portrait. The one in the storage unit. It was her. Elias Vance had painted her, years before she had even met Mark. How was that possible? She read the letter again, searching for clues. He said he had seen her in a garden. She thought back. Years ago, before she met Mark, she used to love visiting the botanical gardens in the city. It was her place of peace, her escape from the stress of work and life. Had Elias been there too? Had he seen her sitting on a bench, lost in thought, and been moved to paint her? The coincidence was staggering, almost too much to believe. The last letter in the bundle was dated just a few months before Clara and Mark got married. It was different from the others. The handwriting was shakier, the lines less steady. In it, Elias wrote that he was sick. He said he didn't have much time left. He told Mark that he had left him everything, all his remaining work, all the paintings and sketches he had accumulated over a lifetime. He asked Mark to find the woman in the garden, the one he had painted. He said she was the embodiment of the love he had always searched for, the purity and grace he had tried to capture in his art but never could. And he hoped with all his heart that Mark would find a love like that for himself. He ended the letter with, "Take care of her, son. She's the key to our future. The key to our future." The words on the tag attached to the key. It wasn't Mark's message to her. It was his father's. He had given her the key to his father's legacy. He had been about to share this secret with her, to bring her into this hidden world on her birthday. And then he had left her. The realization was a physical blow, so powerful she had to put the letters down and steady herself against the table. He hadn't been hiding a secret affair from her all those months. The secret affair had come later. The secret he had been keeping for years, the one he was finally ready to share, was this: his father, the art, the love story that had somehow intersected with her own life before she even knew it. Clara felt the world tilt on its axis. Her neat, clean narrative of a cheating husband and a cold-hearted betrayal suddenly had a massive, gaping hole in it. Mark was a liar and a cheat, yes. There was no excuse for what he had done to her, for the way he had ended their marriage. But he was also a deeply wounded man, carrying the burden of a lost father and a hidden inheritance. And on the very day he had chosen to finally open up to her, to share the most vulnerable part of himself, he had instead chosen to destroy them both. Why? The question screamed in her mind. Why would he do that? Why would he choose that day, of all days, to end their marriage when he was holding the key to a new beginning? The answer, when it came, was almost too painful to bear. He hadn't been strong enough. He had been carrying this secret for so long, it had festered inside him, growing heavier with each passing year. The weight of his father's legacy, the pressure of the art, the grief for a man he never really knew, it had all become too much. And instead of leaning on her, instead of letting her help him carry the burden, he had run. He had found someone new, someone uncomplicated, someone who didn't know about Elias or the paintings or the decades of pain. Jessica was his escape from the weight of his own history. She was a blank slate, a place where he could pretend to be someone else, someone without a past. Clara sat in her kitchen until the sun came up, the letters spread out before her, the portrait of herself propped up on a chair so she could see it. She read and reread the letters, studying each word, each phrase, trying to understand the man who had written them. She looked at her own painted face, seeing herself through the eyes of a stranger, a man who had seen something beautiful in her and tried to capture it forever. She wasn't angry anymore. The cold, hard stone in her stomach was gone, replaced by a deep, aching sadness. Not for herself, but for him. For the broken little boy who had grown into a man who couldn't face his own truth. But the sadness was also for herself. For the love she had given so freely, for the future she had dreamed of, for the man she thought she knew. He had given her the key to his past on the same day he slammed the door on their future. It was the most cruel and confusing gift imaginable. With the morning light, a new clarity dawned on Clara. She had got her revenge, taken the house, and won a hollow victory. But the real story, the one that mattered, was just beginning. And it wasn't about Mark anymore. It was about her, and about the ghost of a man named Elias Vance, who had seen her in a garden years ago and painted her soul. She picked up the phone and called David, her lawyer. "I need you to do something for me," she said, her voice steady despite the exhaustion she felt. "I need you to find out everything you can about an artist named Elias Vance. And I need to know the legal status of his estate." David, ever efficient, got back to her within a week. The information he uncovered was staggering. Elias Vance, it turned out, was not just a talented artist. He was a legend in certain circles. In his youth, he had been part of a famous art movement. His work hung in galleries alongside the greats. Critics had praised his unique vision, his ability to capture emotion on canvas. But he had walked away from it all at the height of his fame, retreating into a life of obscurity, traveling the world, painting for himself alone. His work, however, had only grown in value over the years. A few pieces that had surfaced at auctions in recent times had sold for hundreds of thousands of dollars. Collectors sought his work, but there was so little of it available. The collection in that tiny storage unit, David estimated, was worth millions, perhaps more, and legally it all belonged to Mark. Elias had died intestate without a will. As his only child, Mark was the sole heir. Clara sat in stunned silence. Mark had been sitting on a fortune that could have changed their lives, funded their retirement, allowed them to travel the world to pursue their dreams. And he had hidden it. He had hidden it from her, and he had hidden it from himself. Locked away in a dusty storage unit while he worked a 9-to-5 job he hated, while she cooked his favorite meals and planned surprises for his birthdays. The question now was, what was she going to do with this information? She could go to Mark, tell him what she had found, and watch his world implode. She could use it as leverage to get even more in the divorce, though she had already taken the house. She could demand a share of the art, argue that it was a marital asset discovered after the fact. David had said there might be a case for it, or she could do something else entirely. Something that felt, for the first time in months, like it was truly her choice. Something that had nothing to do with revenge or money or winning. She thought about the portrait of herself, the love and skill with which it was painted, the way it made her feel seen, truly seen, for the first time in years. She thought about Elias' letters, full of longing and regret and a desperate love for his son. This art wasn't just a collection of valuable objects. It was a man's life's work. It was his heart and soul, left behind for the son who never got to know him, the son who was too broken to even look at it. Mark didn't deserve it. He had hidden it, neglected it, been ashamed of it. He had run from it, just as he had run from their marriage. But the art itself deserved to be seen. Elias Vance deserved to be remembered. And Clara, the woman in the garden who had unwittingly inspired his final masterpiece, felt a strange, powerful connection to it all. It was as if Elias had reached across time and chosen her to be the guardian of his legacy. She made a decision. She would not tell Mark, not yet, perhaps not ever. She would become the caretaker of Elias' legacy. She would use her own settlement money to rent a proper, climate-controlled space for the art. She would have it appraised, cataloged, and photographed. She would research Elias' life, his career, his place in the art world. She would learn everything she could about the man who had painted her soul. And then, when she was ready, when she understood it all, she would decide what to do. Over the following months, Clara threw herself into this new purpose with a passion she hadn't felt in years. She rented a small studio space in the city, a bright, airy room with good light. She carefully transported all the art from the storage unit, handling each piece with the reverence it deserved. She hired an art appraiser, an elderly woman with sharp eyes and encyclopedic knowledge who gasped when she saw the collection. "My dear," she said, her voice trembling, "do you have any idea what you have here? This is extraordinary. This is a lost treasure." The appraiser spent weeks cataloging the collection, documenting each piece, researching its provenance. She told Clara stories about Elias Vance, about his brief but brilliant career, about the mystery of his disappearance from the art world. She explained the significance of his work, his unique techniques, his place in the history of American art. Clara listened, fascinated, feeling as if she were getting to know a ghost. She also began to research Elias' life on her own. She found old newspaper articles, exhibition catalogs, interviews. She learned that he had been born in a small town in the Midwest, that he had shown artistic talent from a young age, that he had moved to New York City to pursue his dreams. She learned about his marriage to Mark's mother, a brief and troubled union that had ended in divorce. She learned about his struggles with alcoholism and depression, his retreat from the public eye, his years of wandering. And through it all, she saw a pattern, a thread of sadness and longing that ran through his entire life. He had been searching for something, some connection, some peace, that always seemed just out of reach. The portrait of Clara, she learned, was one of his last works. Painted just a year before his death, it was considered by experts to be among his finest. The Woman in the Garden, as he had called it, was a masterpiece of light and emotion. The appraiser told Clara that if it were to come on the market, it would likely sell for over $1 million. $1 million. Clara looked at her own face, painted by a stranger who had seen something beautiful in her, and felt a strange sense of humility. She wasn't sure what to do with that information. As the months passed, Clara found herself spending more and more time in the studio, surrounded by Elias' art. It became her sanctuary, her place of peace. She would sit for hours, just looking, letting the paintings speak to her. She felt a connection to Elias, a kinship with this troubled, talented man who had spent his life searching for something he could never quite find. She understood that feeling now. She had spent the last year searching for something too, for a sense of purpose, for a reason to get out of bed in the morning. And she had found it here, in this room full of ghosts. She also found herself thinking about Mark less and less. The anger had faded, replaced by a kind of distant pity. She heard through mutual friends that he and Jessica had moved in together, that they seemed happy. She wished them well, or at least she wished him no ill. The revenge she had once craved seemed pointless now. What would it accomplish? It wouldn't undo the past. It wouldn't bring back the love they had lost. It would only create more pain. One day, about a year after she had first discovered the storage unit, Clara received a letter. It was from a gallery in New York City, one of the most prestigious in the country. They had heard about the Elias Vance collection through the appraiser, and they wanted to discuss the possibility of an exhibition. They wanted to share his work with the world. Clara sat with the letter in her hands, her heart pounding. This was it. This was the moment she had been waiting for, without even realizing it. Elias Vance deserved to be seen. His art deserved to be appreciated. And she, Clara, the woman in the garden, had the power to make it happen. She called the gallery and spoke to the curator, a passionate woman named Margaret who had been an admirer of Elias' work for decades. They talked for over an hour, discussing the collection, the history, the possibilities. Margaret was thrilled. She said it would be the exhibition of the decade. She wanted to feature the woman in the garden as the centerpiece. Clara agreed. She signed the contracts, made the arrangements, and prepared to send the art to New York. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. She was letting go of something that had become incredibly precious to her, but she knew it was the right thing to do. The night before the art was to be shipped, Clara went to the studio one last time. She sat alone among the paintings, the silence heavy around her. She looked at her own portrait, at the woman in the garden, and she smiled. "Thank you, Elias," she whispered. "Thank you for seeing me. The exhibition was a triumph." Critics raved. Crowds flocked. The woman in the garden was featured on the cover of art magazines. Clara was invited to the opening, where she stood in a beautiful dress, surrounded by strangers, looking at her own face on the wall. It was surreal, but it was also deeply satisfying. She had done it. She had fulfilled Elias' legacy. As she stood there, a man approached her. He was older, with kind eyes and silver hair. He introduced himself as a collector, an admirer of Elias' work. He told her that he had known Elias years ago, back in New York. They had been friends, young artists together, full of dreams. He talked about Elias with such warmth, such fondness. He told Clara stories she had never heard, stories of Elias' kindness, his humor, his passion for life. He told her that Elias had often spoken of a woman he had seen in a garden, a woman whose face had haunted him, inspired him. He said Elias had told him that painting her was the closest he had ever come to capturing grace. Clara listened, tears in her eyes. She felt as if Elias were there with her, as if his spirit were in the room, finally at peace. The collector looked at her, a question in his eyes. "And you are?" he asked. "What is your connection to all of this?" Clara looked at the painting, at her own face, and then back at the man. She smiled, a soft, peaceful smile. "I'm just the woman in the garden," she said. And in that moment, she knew that her story, the story that had started with such pain and betrayal on her birthday, had become something else entirely. It had become a story of discovery, of healing, of purpose. The revenge she had once thought she wanted was nothing compared to this. This was the real victory, not destroying Mark, but building something beautiful from the ruins. Not winning a battle, but finding herself. She thought of Mark sometimes, wondered if he knew about the exhibition, about the fortune he had walked away from. She imagined he did. The art world was small, and the story of the lost Vance collection was big news. She wondered if he felt regret or anger or nothing at all. It didn't matter anymore. He had made his choice, and she had made hers. The key that had started it all now hung on a small hook in her kitchen, a reminder of where she had been and how far she had come. The key to our future, the tag said, and it was true. It had been the key to her future, just not the future she had imagined. It had unlocked a door she never knew existed, leading her to a life she never could have planned. Clara no longer defined herself by what Mark had done to her. She defined herself by what she had done with what was left. She had taken the broken pieces of her heart and forged them into something new. She had become the guardian of a legacy, the keeper of a flame. And in doing so, she had finally, truly found herself. The woman in the garden smiled from the gallery wall, her eyes full of light, her soul captured in oil and canvas. And somewhere, Clara believed, Elias Vance was smiling too.